All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going deep on a persistent mystery. It's a legend that's been echoing through the hills of eastern Kentucky for almost 2 centuries now. The lost silver mines of Jonathan Swift.
Oh yeah, you've sent me some really fascinating material on this tale, this enduring tale.
Yeah.
Recounts how a man named Swift and his company were supposedly mining silver in that
Oh.
region even before Daniel Boone got there.
That's right. Yeah, and the sources you sent, they detail Swift's alleged journal, which chronicles annual trips from Alexandria, Virginia, beginning in June 1760 and supposedly continuing until late 1769.
Wow.
And this journal, it doesn't just hint at, a few shiny finds. It claims that they were extracting silver bars, actual
Right.
silver bars, and even minting their own coins, which Swift then used to fund his shipping interests.
It really does paint a picture of industry and enterprise in a very remote era. And the journal, it also goes into some of the challenges that they face, encounters with Native Americans,
Mm-hmm.
even a mutiny among their ranks.
Yeah.
And ultimately, those difficulties, coupled with what the journal describes as a shift in Swift's spiritual outlook, led him to cease his mining operations.
Yeah, and the legend doesn't stop there. He supposedly sealed up the mine and
Right.
and get this, a whole cave brimming with treasure.
Wow.
And then he set sail for England or France, seeking investors to really scale up the operation.
But as often happens with these grand stories, there's a twist of fate involved. 15 years later, Swift returns, but now he's blind,
So okay.
tragically unable to locate his hidden riches. It's a narrative packed with adventure and ultimately loss.
Yeah, it truly is. And what really struck me from the sources that you sent is just how deeply ingrained this legend has become. I mean, the material talks about generations who believed wholeheartedly in the mine's existence and dedicated themselves to searching for them. Your sources even mentioned a treasury warrant
Yeah.
from 1788, where John Filson, was a significant early Kentucky mapmaker and historian, recorded 1,000 acres said to contain Swift's mine.
Yeah, that detail really adds a powerful layer of perceived legitimacy
Oh,
to the story.
it does. It really does.
But your sources also introduce a compelling alternative perspective,
Yeah.
which is favored by geologists and historians who approach this with a more critical eye.
Yes, the theory that Swift's silver mining tale was never about silver at all. It suggests it was an elaborate cover story for something else, piracy and counterfeiting.
Which on the surface
Yeah.
has a certain logic to it. But as your sources point out, this theory itself raises some intriguing questions.
Right.
Why undertake such a long and arduous journey to Kentucky just to melt silver when the wilderness much closer to Alexandria would have sufficed?
Exactly. And then there's the journal itself. Why go through the trouble of creating this detailed, yet ultimately false account?
Right, and the language used in the journal, with phrases like deeming it imprudent, seem rather sophisticated for someone who supposedly went to sea at a young age.
Precisely. So we're left with a genuine puzzle. Your sources lay out a very clear mission for our time together: to examine the geological evidence, to critically assess the inconsistencies within the various versions of the Swift journals, and to explore a particularly compelling theory that actually links this legend to a well-known figure in early Kentucky history. Our goal is to help you, our listener, arrive at the most plausible explanation for this enduring mystery.
Sounds good. Let's get to it.
Okay, so let's unpack it, starting with the ground itself. What does the geological evidence tell us about the potential for these legendary silver mines in eastern Kentucky?
Well, the experts that you cited,
Mm.
including geologists and the Kentucky Geological Survey, they expressed significant doubt about substantial silver deposits in that specific area. Mr. Warren H. Anderson from the Kentucky Geological Survey specifically noted that while silver can geologically occur in eastern Kentucky sandstones,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean it exists in economically viable quantities. So theoretically possible, but practically unlikely to be the source of a major mining operation.
So the first piece of our puzzle, the ground itself, strongly suggests that the lost silver part of this legend might be a myth. Trace amounts here and there don't equate to a silver bonanza.
Exactly. Your sources point out that trace amounts of silver have been reported in other parts of Kentucky, specifically the Western Kentucky Fluorspar District,
Mm.
which is an area known for certain types of mineral deposits,
Mm.
and the Central Kentucky Mineral District. However, these are not in the eastern part of the state, where Swift supposedly did his mining.
Yeah.
That's a crucial geographical distinction.
Yeah, this really clashes with Swift's claims, doesn't it? I mean, the journal talks about two distinct workings and multiple locations where they were finding silver ore. And if that wasn't enough, it even mentions Frenchmen operating at least two furnaces nearby, suggesting a rather significant and established mining operation.
What's fascinating here is the complete lack of any actual silver veins being discovered in eastern Kentucky,
Mm.
despite centuries of development.
Mm.
Things like highway construction,
Yeah.
excavation, strip mining, not to mention all the dedicated cave exploration and, let's be honest, treasure hunting. That has gone on. Yet Swift claims to have found several veins, including one rather conveniently located in a cave after a wounded bear led him there. It stretches credulity.
It really does. And it seems like there have been numerous false alarms over the years, right? Your sources mentioned these silver nuggets found in Wolfe County. That turned out to be nothing more than pyrite, good old fool's gold.
Right. Or even lead sulfide.
Yeah.
Which apparently can look a bit like silver to the untrained eye.
There's even an anecdote about a land tract. One supposedly containing Swiss elusive mine being offered to the state of Kentucky for a hefty sum. And when officials investigated, the silver in the prospector's pit turned out to be just plain mica, a flaky mineral that can glitter.
Oh, that's almost comical. And then there's the story about the silver vein in the Red River Canyon. I can just picture someone getting all excited, only to realize that it was just scraping from an aluminum canoe, and the follow-up prank with the salting of the area with silver filings. It really highlights how easily people can be swayed by wishful thinking and a bit of deception.
So the overall geological picture painted by your sources is pretty clear. There's a significant lack of evidence to support the idea of substantial silver deposits in eastern Kentucky.
Despite centuries of searching and development, the complete absence of any significant silver deposits in eastern Kentucky strongly undermines the core claim of Swift's prolific mining operation.
Okay, so the ground beneath our feet seems to contradict the legend. Let's turn our attention to the supposed evidence in black and white, the Swift journals. What did your sources reveal when they dissected these historical documents?
Well, the first thing that jumps out is the sheer number of different versions of Swift journals that exist. Your sources emphasize that these versions vary quite significantly in their details. We're talking about discrepancies in things like Swift's birthday, the notable number of mining excursions that he supposedly made, and perhaps most crucially, the directions provided for actually finding these legendary mines. So a major takeaway here is the lack of a single consistent historical record, immediately casting doubt on the entire narrative as if factual basis.
That immediately raises a red flag, doesn't it? If it were a genuine historical record, you would expect more consistency. Can you give us an example of some of these differing details?
Absolutely. Your sources highlight the contrasting opening lines. From two different versions, one version states Swift was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1712, with his ancestors arriving in America in 1637. Another version, originating from Tennessee, claims George William Swift was born in Salisbury, England in 1689, the son of a copper, silver, and lead miner. These are wildly different origin stories for the same supposed individual.
That's not just a minor detail. That's a completely different person. And your sources focus on the most detailed version, the one reproduced in Henson's book. What stood out as particularly suspicious about that one?
The very beginning is problematic. A journal that starts with the straightforward declaration, "I was born," as if it were a biographical account, rather than contemporaneous notes, is immediately suspect. While this version does align in some parts with quoted fragments from Connolly and Coulter's History of Kentucky, your sources suggest that significant portions of the text appear to have been essentially lifted and paraphrased by whoever compiled this particular version of the journal.
So it's not looking like an authentic first-hand account. What other textual issues did your sources uncover?
There are some rather clumsy moments, to put it mildly. Your sources point out instances where paraphrased sections are recorded word for word later on in the journal, as if they were new entries. Even more bizarrely, there's an instance where Swift, within a sentence, starts quoting himself in quotation marks. It's a significant editorial lapse that undermines the credibility of this version.
That sounds less like a genuine journal and more like a poorly stitched together compilation. What about the ending of the journal? Your sources mention a discrepancy there as well.
Yes, the journal purportedly continues after Swift's return from England, at which point he claims to become completely blind, yet the writing continues, as if he still had his sight. Now, one could argue that he dictated it, but even then, a statement attributed to 1765, while he was supposedly still actively mining, where he laments that the treasure will lie in the cave for eternity. Seems completely out of place. Why would he write such a defeatist conclusion decades before the supposed loss of his site and the inability to relocate the mine?
It just doesn't make logical sense. It's like the ending was written with the benefit of hindsight, rather than as a contemporaneous thought. Now let's talk about the name itself. Jonathan Swift. Obviously, the name brings to mind the famous author of Gulliver's Travels. Was there any connection there, according to your sources?
The connection seems to be purely inspirational, if anything. The famous satirist Jonathan Swift died in 1745, well before the time frame of the alleged Kentucky mining expeditions. However, your sources do note a potential link in the thematic resonance. Gulliver was a ship's captain, and the title of his work echoes a phrase in the journal, describing the furnace as being in a very remote place in the West. So while the famous Jonathan Swift couldn't have been the miner, his persona might inadvertently contributed to the legend's appeal.
That's an interesting thought. What about the cut signature included in Henson's book? It was supposedly there to add authenticity. What does your investigation of that reveal?
That turned out to be quite revealing. Your sources detail how this cut signature wasn't actually an original signature from the mining Swift at all. It was a reproduction taken from an old land deed. While the deed does confirm the existence of a real Jonathan Swift from Alexandria, Virginia, a merchant, which could align with the claimed shipping interests. Further research uncovered that this same Mr. Swift reacquired and redeeded the land in 1809, years after the supposed death of the mining Swift.
So a real Jonathan Swift from the right place, but the timeline doesn't match up. And there's more to it, right?
There is. The signature on the first deed
Yeah.
wasn't even in Mr. Swift's own handwriting. It was written by the recorder, who copied the entire document into the deed book. So the authentic signature turns out to be neither authentic to the mining Swift nor even penned by the Alexandria merchant himself on the initial deed.
Wow, that really undermines any attempt to authenticate the journal using that signature. So this real Jonathan Swift from Alexandria. What more did your sources tell us about him? Was he a plausible candidate for the mining adventurer?
Not at all. His biography paints a picture of a prominent Alexandria resident born near Boston, Massachusetts, who became an importing merchant, married, had children, and died in 1824, receiving Masonic honors at his burial. This is a far cry from a blind pirate or a centenarian silver miner in Kentucky. Your sources conclude quite definitively that this real Jonathan Swift is not the Swift of the silver mine legend.
So the name seems to be a red herring, or perhaps a borrowed one. And it wasn't just the signature that raised questions about the journal's authenticity, was it? Your sources mention unreliable genealogical data as well.
Yes, some versions of the journal include genealogical information that appears to be fraudulent. These sections sometimes seem to have been copied, often carelessly and much later, from actual Swift genealogies. The earliest documented references to the legend don't even consistently use the name Jonathan. They refer to a certain man named Swift, one Swift, or simply said Swift. The Tennessee version even provides a completely different first name, George William. While many individuals named John or Jonathan Swift undoubtedly existed, there's simply no solid proof of a Swift, regardless of his first name, who engaged in early silver mining in Kentucky.
It really does sound like the journals are more fiction than fact, and your sources go so far as to suggest actual tampering, beyond just simple copying errors.
That's the conclusion. The inconsistencies, the textual oddities, the misleading signature, it all points to something more deliberate than just mistakes made in the process of transcription. So the evidence strongly suggests that the literal story of Swift's mining is highly questionable. This leads us to an intriguing alternative presented in your sources. Could the journal not be a historical record at all? But something else entirely.
Exactly. Let's delve into this idea of the Swift Journal as an allegory, possibly connected to Freemasonry. For listeners who might not be familiar, Freemasonry is a fraternal organization with a rich history, using symbolic rituals and teachings, often drawn from the stonemason's craft. This was a really intriguing part of your sources. So instead of a literal account, we're looking at the journal as a story with a hidden symbolic meaning. Is that right?
Precisely. Your sources shift focus to the seemingly precise directions for locating the mines that appear in the latter part of the journal. The very details that have sent countless treasure hunters into the Kentucky hills. But as your sources astutely point out, even these directions contain inherent vagueness, like the furnace, being located in a very remote place in the West.
Right, very remote is hardly a pinpoint location. And while the legend talks about all these Swift maps, your sources indicate that they're actually quite scarce compared to the journal copies.
They are, and those that do exist are often imperfect. To illustrate the vagueness of the descriptions, your sources mention the construction of a hypothetical map. Based on the most detailed journal version, the exercise revealed just how much flexibility of interpretation was required, highlighting the lack of true precision in the landmarks and distances provided.
So even if you tried to follow the clues, you'd likely end up going in circles. But Swift does give latitude and longitude coordinates for the richest ore, doesn't he? That seems pretty specific.
It does. On the surface, the journal gives a latitude of 37 degrees 56 minutes north, or sometimes 57 minutes, for the richest ore, and 38 degrees 2 minutes north for a less valuable vein. Both said to be just a little west of a longitude of 83 degrees. However, just a little is hardly a precise measurement. And when you take those coordinates literally, as your sources point out, the latitude and longitude for the richest ore pinpoint a location in Morgan County near Relief, Kentucky. The problem, neither the described geographical configurations nor a silver mine exists there. So what appears to be a precise clue actually leads nowhere, suggesting a potential flaw in the literal interpretation of the journal.
So the seemingly precise coordinates actually lead to a dead end. Yet the search continues to this day. Why do people keep looking despite these glaring discrepancies?
Your sources suggest several contributing factors. There's the reasonable assumption that Swift's calculations might have been off. People selectively interpret existing landmarks to fit the descriptions. New maps and alleged copies of the journal continue to surface, keeping the hope alive. And let's not forget the power of belief and the allure of a good mystery. Sometimes the public is simply eager to believe, and skepticism is unwelcome. Plus, the legend itself has become a widespread phenomenon across several states. And as your sources note, it's often good for local business.
Absolutely, that makes sense. So with the literal account falling apart, let's delve deeper into this idea of the Swift Journal as a Masonic allegory. What specific clues in the journal point to this interpretation?
Well, your sources draw attention to a seemingly innocuous detail, Swift's mention of marking a tree, with the symbols of a compass, trowel, and square. Wow. These are foundational symbols in Freemasonry, representing morality and the principles of right living, compass and square, and the working tools of the craft, trowel. This is a pretty direct link right there.
That's a strong connection. And your sources emphasize that Freemasonry, while having its secrets, is a benevolent society focused on moral and ethical development.
Precisely, and the connections don't stop there. Swift repeatedly mentions curious marks and peculiar marks that he used to identify locations, including a symbol of a triangle. The triangle also holds symbolic significance within Freemasonry. Even the broad arrow under the symbol represented in the journal has Masonic connotations.
This is starting to paint a very different picture of the journal's purpose. What other parallels did your sources uncover between Swift's narrative and Masonic practices or symbolism?
There are numerous others. For instance, the Masonic ritual for the entered apprentice includes a statement about the intense heat of charcoal being able to melt even the most stubborn metals. Similarly, Swift recounts making charcoal in large quantities for smelting ore.
It's almost like the journal is peppered with these subtle nods to Masonic ideas.
It really is. Consider Swift's statement.